Morning and welcome to Backchannel. It's Wednesday, December 15, 9 a.m. here on the West Coast. It's noon on the Eastern Coast, the coast that is Eastern. And thanks for joining me. I'm Anthony Davis. This is the Anthony Davis Show. And this morning, lots to talk about. We're going to be whizzing through the morning papers, looking at the latest developments surrounding Mark Meadows. Of course, he is the former Trump chief of staff and arguably one of the dumbest men in America. Different day, different Cuomo. Ex-New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is ordered to give up $5.1 million in pandemic book earnings, as it's discovered he used state resources to write his book. We'll take a look at his story in some more detail later on as well. Also, the House of Representatives narrowly passes an anti-Islamophobia bill. Sorry, I'm still a little drunk from last night. As Republican Senator Scott Perry implies that the Republican who proposed the bill, Maher, is part of a terrorist organization. It's just like beggars belief. So we'll look at that story as well, and also the life of Little Women author Louisa May Alcott, who died on this day in 1888. All the eights. 1888. If you want to get in touch, you do the usual. Just wake up your device. If you're using an Echo Show, then the word say, then your message. If you'd like to use a messaging service on your browser, go to backchannel.tv. And if you're watching on YouTube, the comment section also pops up on my screen. So you can talk to me throughout the show. I will bring you the latest newspaper reviews. Then we'll go deeper into some of the stories. If you have a newspaper where you live and you want us to review it, then just give me a shout and we'll sort that out as well. Okay, New York Times is first on this Wednesday morning, December 15. The headline is Trump filings used in loans face scrutiny. That's right, because of course, Donald Trump was desperate to hide his tax returns from everybody. I mean, not even just the committee that was investigating his tax returns, from everybody, because it's supposed to be on public record. If you become the president, you just show your tax returns. I find it very interesting that people in America didn't really make the correlation between him not wanting to and him having something to hide. Do you see what I mean? It just seems obvious to me. If you're not prepared to do that, you've obviously got something to hide. And yet, nobody seemed to kind of push that view. Well, what have you got to hide? What have you got to hide? What have you got to hide? Keep saying at him, what have you got to hide? Interview him. Why haven't you released your tax returns? What have you got to hide? But no one seemed to do that. I often find this with American news networks and journalists, that they sometimes go for the wrong bit of the bait. I found this with these text messages that went from Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham to Mark Meadows, saying you've got to get him to call it off. I really don't think that's the bit to focus on. I think there is other things that are way more significant than that. Anyway, that's just how they do it here. I'm learning, I'm new in town. 5 years. As prosecutors in Manhattan weigh whether to charge Donald J. Trump with fraud, they've zeroed in on financial documents that he used to obtain loans and boast about his wealth, according to people with knowledge of the matter. The documents, compiled by Mr. Trump's longtime accountants and known as annual statements of financial condition, could help answer a question at the heart of the long-running criminal investigation into the former president. Did he inflate the value of his assets to defraud his lenders? I mean, come on. All the guy does is boast about how big the crowd size is, how big his aeroplane is, how big his following is, how big his bank balance is. Like, that's all he does. That's who he is. The guy is an inflated person. He looks like he has got a valve sticking out of his backside and somebody has inflated him. That's who he is. He is an inflated ego, an inflated personality, an inflated sense of authority, an inflated sense of superiority. The guy is inflated. So of course he did. You don't even need a court case. In recent weeks, prosecutors at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Cyrus R. Vance Jr., have questioned one of Mr. Trump's accountants before a grand jury as part of their examination of the financial statements said the people with knowledge of the matter. Yes, play it down, play it down. If the prosecutors seek an indictment, the case outcome could hinge on whether they can use the documents to prove that a defining feature of Mr. Trump's public persona, his penchant for hyperbole, was so extreme and intentional when dealing with his lenders that it crossed the line into fraud. The whole thing is fraud. What are you talking about? The whole thing. It's his thing. It's how he operates, you know? He loves it. I wouldn't mind, but I was thinking about this last night, you know, the mind of like a criminal. And I was saying yesterday how people who are bad people don't realize they're bad or don't think they're bad. They just think everyone else is bad. That's what protects us. It's like how ugly people can still go on dates. It's the same thing. Humanity has been designed so that we just keep going. We don't go, oh God, I'm so ugly. We don't do that. We put some lipstick on and we're like, I look great. That's built into humanity. It's amazing. And it's the same with people who operate in the criminal underworld. They think it's funny. They don't think of themselves as baddies. They think of themselves as clever, as getting one over on the system or on the state or on the, you know, that's how they operate. Anyway, there's plenty of these people around, you know. Trump's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the tragedy of all this. Cuomo is another one. Andrew Cuomo. Let's line them up. You know, the funny thing is they're all friends. I wouldn't mind, but like, you know, if the next person I'm going to talk about is Ghislaine Maxwell, you're guaranteed you're going to find a photograph with Trump, Maxwell, and Cuomo in the picture. They're all friends. It's the whole thing. It's like a huge racket. A New York State Ethics Board ordered former Governor Andrew M. Cuomo on Tuesday to turn over millions of dollars in profits from his coronavirus pandemic memoir, giving him 30 days to comply. The extraordinary directive is the latest development in a fall from grace for the former governor, who in the span of just 4 months lost his job and reputation and who's now facing a criminal trial after being accused of groping an aide in the executive mansion. Why is there even an executive mansion? I mean, if you work for the state, you shouldn't be in a mansion. You should be in the worst office in town. I'm trying to raise my seat, but I don't think this seat is really capable of being raised much higher than it is already. Maybe I just need to be taller. I think I'm shrinking. If I carry on like this, I'll look like Paul Simon. It says the extraordinary directive... Oh, no, I've read that. It says it was not long ago that Mr. Cuomo was at his peak, winning nationwide acclaim and landing a lucrative book contract in the first months of New York's pandemic crisis. The resulting memoir, American Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic, was intended to capitalize on the moment and give him a financial cushion that would safeguard his future. But by a 12-1 vote on Tuesday, the state's Joint Commission on Public Ethics stripped him of all of the book's proceeds. Yeah, I noticed that Mark Meadows just wrote a book as well, which is basically what has prevented him from being able to call presidential privilege. Because he'd just written a book. And his book has just come out this week, and I was taking a look at it on the Amazon this morning. And I mean, it's only available in hardcover currently, and it's expensive. It's called The Chief's Chief. And the only photograph he could find... He wanted a picture of him standing behind Donald Trump. So the only picture he could find is of him looking like he's farting behind Donald Trump. He's just got this kind of face going on. Like literally, maybe he took that from I think he must have taken it from a news, from a video. And there's a quote from Donald Trump on the front of it that he's used. He's obviously said, "Oh, Donald, give us a quote for the front of my book." And because Donald Trump doesn't have an intellect and can't use any decent words other than big and great and bigly, this is the quote that Trump's given him for the front of the book, right? You know it's going to be a good book when you get a quote as good as this. "Mark was a great chief of staff. As good as it gets. We will have a big future together. That's it. That's it. So big was in there because, of course, big is the only thing he knows of. Big future together in jail, of course, because Mark Meadows is definitely going to go to jail off the back of this. So much incriminating evidence now that it's pretty much a done deal. And Cyrus Vance, obviously, at the Southern District of New York, is after Trump for fraud, so they'll probably be in the same prison. But I just love the fact that, the great orator that is Donald Trump, 4 years as the President of the United States, and the best that he can come up with was, Mark was a great chief of staff. As good as it gets. We will have a big future together. I mean, who says big future? You say great future. You don't say big future. This doesn't make sense. Anyway, The Chief's Chief is the name of the book. If you want to buy it for somebody for Christmas as a joke, it's $25.99, available from Amazon in hardcover. If you just want to buy it for them as a joke. I might even order one myself, just as a joke. I just had to order a whole load of new books because my ceiling was leaking in the rain because we had a massive storm here and it shorted out everything, which is why we had some technical problems yesterday. Everything basically shorted out because water got into the electrical circuits. That's why nothing worked yesterday. Anyway, it's dried out a bit today and we're back. We are back. What's the other books that it suggests? Amazon always suggests a book. Oh, Peter Navarro's book, In Trump Time, a journal of America's plague year. Oh my goodness! Do you remember Peter Navarro? He was Trump's aide, who was I think he was an orthodontist or something. He was like a dental technician, and he got given like a medical advisory job, and he was completely nuts, and still is completely nuts. And so his book is called... Maybe I'll just buy all of the books by former Trump aides. Isn't that a great idea? Because, they're all just going to be... They're probably all going to be full of contradictory lies anyway. That's what's so interesting about this. Elizabeth, good morning in Colorado. Elizabeth saying no. What, don't buy the book? David's in California. Troy's in Girard, wherever that is. Nice to know you're part of the Backchannel this morning. I'm Anthony. It's the Anthony Davis Show till 11 a.m. Pacific, and that's 2 o'clock Eastern. So we're looking at the New York Times this morning, and House pushes criminal case for Meadows. Also on the front here, it said the House voted last night to recommend holding Mark Meadows, who served as Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, in criminal contempt for refusing to cooperate with its investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol, escalating a legal battle against a potentially crucial witness in a widening inquiry. We were also, because it's obviously taken a year now, it's nearly a year since the insurrection. And those of us who care deeply and passionately about American democracy have been very frustrated that it's taking so long. That the first thing they did is go after these hooligans, who I don't blame actually, because most of them were put up to it by the president. Take your country back, be strong, I'll go with you to the Capitol, all that stuff. And so, they were following Trump's orders. They all said the same thing, weirdly, in their interviews. They've all said the same thing. Well, we were just following the Trump's orders. So I don't actually blame them as much as I think they should be prosecuted. But, they're just small fry, really, aren't they? Because it's the organizers of this event who are at the core of this investigation. And Meadows is clearly at the core of this, along with, Hannity and, isn't it crazy that Fox News hosts are communicating with the chief of staff? Because Trump doesn't have a phone. I mean, they give him a phone or he uses a phone to do a tweet, but no one can communicate with him with a phone. And that's why his own son, DT Jr., was texting Mark Meadows on the day, saying he's got to call them off, it's enough already. Trump's own son can't get in touch with Trump. And it occurred to me, because I don't know if you watch Succession, but Brian Cox's character is, kind of Trumpian in many ways. And the whole season, well, all 3 seasons of Succession, it's just cell phones. I've actually given up with it. I'm onto episode 2 of the new season. I've given up with it because it's just cell phones. That's the whole show, is cell phones. She phones him, he phones her, she texts him, she's texting her. I'm not interested. I don't want to see people just doing cell phones. It's not enough for me. I know it represents real life. Stacey, good morning. Thanks for joining us. But I just feel like we deserve more than cell phones. So no one really says anything. It's all just speculative and weird. Anyway, we're going to talk more about Mark Meadows later because it's such a big story, and there's another big story that is developing. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called coronavirus. Here's a warning. This is just a little warning. Because America's over it now, no one cares about Omicron. They just think it's mild, it'll be fine. Omicron is going to devastate America. It is going to devastate America. It's going to be worse than Alpha. It's going to be different to Delta. So yeah, you'll have less extreme illness, but people are going to go sick. Because the vaccines, unless you're boosted, are going to not work well enough. And 30% of the country don't think that the whole coronavirus is a hoax anyway. So, this is what's going to happen. I'm warning you now. We're going to have a conversation in 4 weeks' time. Carla, write it down. 4 weeks' time, we're going to have a conversation where Omicron is devastating America. Fauci, I have to say, is dragging his heels a little bit on this one. Because the UK is trying to vaccinate 1 million people a week. They're actually trying to get everybody boosted by the end of the year. They've only got 2 weeks to do it. And that's insane. But they've got the military in, jabbing people in the street. And you couldn't do that in America because there's 361 million people versus 65 million people. So obviously that's a bit of a different thing, but they do have a military that's big enough, and they have enough vaccines. Africa, however, is now saying that they're not going to be able to vaccinate even 70% of the population by 2024. It's because we stole all the vaccine. We basically stole all the vaccine. All the rich countries in the West stole the vaccine. It's a tragedy. But that's how it is. Let me just turn on my big clock because I was waiting for this thing to boot up a little bit. I've got a lovely big clock here, but it's on a screen. There we go. Now I can see the time and I can enjoy the fact that there's a huge clock in front of me. We were saying yesterday that it's important to be able to know where you are in your day. And if you take psychedelic drugs, the first thing that goes is the timeline. You literally lose all sense of reality. And the thing that's missing is the timeline. We need the timeline. I've always found it fascinating how our stomach is so connected to our clock, So your stomach, if you had no clocks, your stomach would tell you whether it was lunchtime or dinner time. Do you see what I mean? Like, we have a natural stomach clock. Mine goes off every 45 minutes. It's like a little alarm. This is exciting. The New York Police Department, at an urgent moment, will get its first female leader. Aha! The typical woman having an abortion today... Oh, no, that's the wrong section. Sorry. I'm literally blind. I literally cannot see. That's shifting trends for abortion since the 1970s. Well, that's a good story, but maybe I'll do New York Police Department first, because... It says Keechant Sewell, the Nassau County Chief of Detectives, will become New York City's first female police commissioner, taking over the nation's largest police force at a critical moment. Chief Sewell's appointment, which is expected to be announced on Wednesday, was seen as one of the most important decisions for Eric Adams, the incoming mayor, as he begins to fill out his administration. Her selection was confirmed on Tuesday night by Evan Thies, a spokesman for Mr. Adams. Chief Sewell, 49, was chosen from among a field of rumored candidates from within the New York Police Department and from larger police departments around the country. Mr. Adams is a former police captain, ran as a centrist in the Democratic primary, promising to address a troubling rise in violence and to rein in police abuse. He'll be counting on Chief Sewell to help him strike that balance. It's kind of exciting, isn't it? Because really, if all police chiefs were female and black, we'd probably be in a much better place, wouldn't we? Don't you think? I mean, Val Dennings, who I was a big supporter of, I actually wanted her to be the vice president rather than Kamala Harris. I think she was a former police chief. And then, who is the police chief in Kenosha? Was it Letitia James? Kenosha Police Department. I think it's Letitia James. She's a black female and quite brilliant. So Val Dennings, Letitia, these people who've, come up through the police service themselves, they've kind of, gone through the ranks. These people are, in my opinion, being black and female. Because can you imagine, growing up female in America? That's hard. Can you imagine growing up black in America? That's hard. Imagine growing up black female in America. Even harder. Imagine growing up black female and joining the police service in America. Triple hardness. So you become a more evolved human. You learn how to manage people, to protect yourself, to stand up for yourself in a way that white men never needed to. We really shouldn't underestimate quite how difficult it is to do these things. It made me very sad yesterday. I was watching right-wing TV news, as I often do. I was watching Newsmax for about an hour. And they hate Kamala Harris. They hate her. And so they just take clips of her giggling because she has a bit of a nervous laugh. And so they cut those clips of her giggling and they back them all together. So they just show these clips of her. And then it cuts back to the newscaster and they're just like, this is your vice president. No mention of how hard it is for a black female to get on in this country, let alone become the VP. Just clip together those little moments of her having a nervous chuckle. Now, I agree, it's not helpful having a nervous chuckle, but she does. Doesn't stop her doing her job. Hasn't stopped her becoming a very respected and powerful attorney, DA, VP. And yet, there is this desire, and it's racism. I mean, that's what it is. People don't understand what systemic racism is, but it is racism. Because you have to behave differently when dealing with somebody of color. You have to make an extra special effort. You have to see their color and respond to it. Not claim you don't see color and treat everyone the same. No, that's not how it is. You have to make an extra special effort to not show prejudice, because we have 200 years to undo. So it takes an extra special effort. It was very fascinating watching Newsmax for an hour. It was truly quite harrowing for me to see, for somebody who likes to operate in the truth space, to see untruths presented as truth for an hour was just really quite offensive. And there is this certain tragedy associated with the fact that people watch this and they think it's acceptable. They think it's, they think it's real. And it's just opinion. It's just opinion. Literally, that's all it is. It's just someone's opinion. Very nice tunes today, Carla. Thank you very much. I'm really tripping out to this stuff here. We're back on lo-fi, are we? Yeah, like it. I might turn the lights down low and slip over on some fluids. Okay, let's speed up a bit here. I'll just do that shifting trends for abortion since the 1970s story very quickly. It says the typical woman having an abortion today is already a mother. She's in her 20s and has taken some college classes. Very rarely is she past her first trimester of pregnancy. The portrait of abortion in America has changed, along with society, and is far different from what it was when Roe v. Wade established the right to an abortion in 1973. The typical patient is less likely to be a teenager and more likely to be poor, unmarried. But in the reproductive lives of women and transgender and non-binary people who can become pregnant across America, abortion is not uncommon. That's so interesting, isn't it? That when Roe v. Wade was established, the world was different. I mean, I wasn't even born in 1973. I really feel like... What is this obsession with, like, not evolving, not accepting change? It's built into all of us. People love to... I mean, there's an actress who lives around here. She's a neighbor of mine. Shall I say her name? Maybe I'll say her name. Her name is Alicia Silverstone. Do you know who she is, Alicia Silverstone? She played the Batgirl in Batman and various things. Well, so she's my neighbor, and I look at her Twitter sometimes, and all she seems to do, because she's not really acting so much anymore, is she just posts old videos and pictures of her in movies from 20 or 30 years ago. And I just really feel... I understand there's like a nostalgic aspect to this, but I also feel like it's important to move on, And I sometimes think that a lack of work as an actor, I mean, I don't know her deal. I don't know, maybe she doesn't want to be an actor anymore. Maybe there's no parts for her. I don't know what the situation is. But there's this constant retrospective attitude towards one's career. I mean, I would never mention anything I did more than 15 minutes ago because I'm so embarrassed of everything. And yet, and yet here we are in this world where we are obsessed with the past. We're obsessed with how it used to be, what we used to look like, what society used to look like. And the reality is that we evolve and society evolves and people change. So how do we qualify that, It's very interesting to me. Anyway, let's move on because there's a lot to get through this morning. She's very vegan. Alicia Silverstone is very vegan. She's always posting vegan recipes. It's relentless recipe posting. I actually saw her this morning because she walks her dog in the morning. A fight for survival along tornado's path of carnage on the front of the Wall Street Journal. The story goes, soon after a siren warned of an incoming tornado on Friday, nursing assistant Linda Knapp took an elderly resident at the Monette Manor Nursing Home in Monette, Arkansas to the bathroom. Then the twister struck, ripping the roof off the building and dislodging chunks of the wall. I mean, did they not get much notice of this? I really thought that there would be more notice. Do they just not get notice? Because I know, like with the earthquakes now, we can get like 20 seconds notice to take cover. Is there no twister early warning? No, clearly not. So, I mean, the more and more I hear about this, we talked about this yesterday, but the more and more I hear about the Midwest tornadoes, there was 5 of them now, they reckon. Because originally they said there was 4, I think there's 5 now of these twisters that came through and just devastated everywhere. It suggests numerous warnings were issued in advance. Well, there we are. I mean, I know that you get like a general weather system warning, there's a storm coming, but do they know that there's an actual twister coming? How far out does a twister... Because this is, one of these twisters traveled the furthest that a twister has ever been recorded to travel. New data bolsters Pfizer's pill for COVID-19. Also on the front of the Wall Street Journal this morning, it says Pfizer has said trial results of its experimental COVID-19 antiviral pill confirmed a positive response for those infected with the coronavirus, greatly reducing the risk of hospitalization and likely appearing to work against the Omicron variant. The data, springing from final analysis of late-stage study, come as the Food and Drug Administration reviews whether to clear use of the drug, named Paxlovid, in high-risk adults. Now, I was reading quite a lot about this last night. I actually think this is amazing, this Pfizer drug, because the Merck drug, which has not been authorized in the US because of some issues with it, but it has been authorized in the UK, weirdly. The Merck drug, you need to take, I think it was 7 or 8 pills or 9 pills a day. Do you remember that? Whereas this pill, you take 2 pills a day, 12 hours apart. And this has a 90% efficacy, 90%, versus the Merck pill, which had a 30% efficacy. And to get 90% efficacy out of a pill, normally you would have to go intravenous or, through an injection to get that level of efficacy. That is amazing. Anyway, it says the data springing from a final analysis of late-stage study comes as the FDA reviews whether to clear use of the drug. This was a real home run, gives tremendous hope for another highly effective intervention, says the Chief Scientific Officer, Mikael Dolston. And, I was looking on social media at this, and some people were going, well, it's just Pfizer trying to make more money. And my attitude has never changed toward this. Pharmaceutical companies make money. That's what they do. But they also make drugs that work. They operate in countries that are capitalist countries that allow for this to happen. And all the people, this is the weird thing, all the people that complain that Pfizer are going to make a fortune out of this are also the people that fear socialism. They're the people that are like, I don't live in a socialist country. And it's like, well, you're also complaining that pharmaceutical companies are making a shed load of money. So what do you want? You want to live in a capitalist society or a socialist society? Do you want to live in a society where we share the wealth? And they're not allowed to make the money. They have to share the profits with their employees or share the profits with the society through taxation. UAE threatens multi-billion-dollar deal for US arms. This is the United Arab Emirates is threatening to pull out of a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy American-made F-35 aircraft, Reaper drones, and other advanced munitions, US officials said, in what would be a significant shake-up between two longtime partners, increasingly at odds over China's role in the Gulf. It says the Emirati government told US officials that it intended to halt the deal because Abu Dhabi thought security requirements the US had laid out to safeguard the high-tech weaponry from Chinese espionage were too onerous, and the country's national sovereignty was in jeopardy, officials said. It was unclear whether the $23 billion arms deal signed in the final days of the Trump administration is dead, or whether the Emirati threat is a bargaining move on the eve of a planned visit on Wednesday by a high-level UAE military delegation to the Pentagon for 2 days of talks. It's interesting, isn't it? Look, I've stuck the microphone in the middle. What do we think about this? What do we think about this being stuck in the middle like this? It's different, isn't it? Carla's not sure. It's like a big, giant thing in the middle. It's just an idea. Covers my face, which I like. I'll put it back for now. It doesn't change the sound much. This thing is so clever. You could be back here and it sounds the same as when you're here. Isn't that clever? Look, you can be back here and it sounds the same as when you're here. Do you know why that is? Because this thing, which was designed in 1959, is a 1959 microphone, has a thing called variable D. And it means that the sound doesn't change when you're here or when you're here. I don't know how they do it, because any other microphone in the world, when you come away from it, your voice gets thinner and quieter. But this thing, you come away from it and you sound the same as when you're here. It's amazing. It's more balanced on this side. I understand. Kenneth, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Anthony is in Wisconsin. Good morning. Great name. Nice to see you. Welcome to Backchannel. 9:35 here on the West Coast, 12:35 Eastern. And if you want to get in touch, just wake up your device. If you've got a screen, then you can see me. If you're listening just on your speaker, then you can hear me. But you can also chat via the chat service. Just go to backchannel.tv. We're looking at the front of the Wall Street Journal this morning. Let's move on, actually. Let's jump to another newspaper. Should we do the San Antonio Express News for Stacey now? Stacey, because I know you're going to have to go off for either for a bath or for Bible study or for something. So let's just crowbar this in. San Antonio Express News on this Wednesday morning leads with openings could shift Texas further right. Yes, more than 24 members of the Texas legislature are retiring or running for a different seat next year, creating a slew of vacancies that could push both chambers to become redder and more polarized by the time lawmakers reconvene in 2023. Says many of the outgoing members are center-right or establishment politicians with years of experience, opening up seats for younger and more ideologically extreme replacements. In many cases, their districts were redrawn to strengthen the GOP's hold on the legislature, eliminating all but a few of the battleground contests that led to attract more moderate candidates. I mean, the fact that we have legislatures in this country in itself is anti-democratic, in my view, because what it does is it puts more barriers between the voter and the count, right? It's more layers of bureaucracy. The changes paired with new political maps that leave little openings for Democrats to gain ground in November have laid the groundwork for an even more conservative legislature, even as Republicans toast the 2021 legislative session as the most conservative in the state's history. The tides are shifting again, said Representative Dan Huberty, a moderate Republican from North Houston, who is not seeking re-election. You have different political leaders and the constituency has a view of what they want. You're going to see a shift. I would assume it's going to be more conservative. Well, you know why this is, don't you? This is because the conservatives know that the only way off the back of Trump's, 4 years, the only way they're going to win anything now is to cheat. It's the only way they're going to win. To cheat. The Capitol is also poised to lose some of its longest-serving legislators to retirement, draining a generation of policy expertise on areas such as healthcare, education, agriculture, and the border. It's very interesting. And the younger candidates are all much more ideologically extreme with their views. And this is what we have to understand. It's like, more experienced politicians understand a little more about give and take. But the younger people coming through, they are absolutely staunch supporters in extremes. In extremes. City disputes findings on demolitions. City officials are attacking a damning report that found San Antonio orders homes to be vacated and demolished at a much higher rate than other large Texas cities, often bypasses a hearing process and uses code enforcement measures heavily on the near west and east sides. Again, on the San Antonio Express News, text messages renew focus on Trump's inaction during the January 6th insurrection. Well, that's really the thing that I find most interesting. His inaction. And I actually tweeted a video yesterday that has been circulating. I think it was filmed on Donald Trump Jr.'s phone, and he posted it as a TikTok. I don't know if you've seen this video. This is backstage at the January 6th rally. Now, I don't know if this was before Trump went on stage or after Trump had come off stage. But they're backstage and they're watching the screens. And you see Trump watching, and Mark Meadows is there being a douche, and Eric and Kimberly Guilfoyle, who's one of the most remarkable creatures on this planet, weirdly used to be married to Gavin Newsom, the Democratic California governor. This is Eric Trump's wife, or Donald Trump Jr.'s wife, one of the wives. She's the one that made that crazy speech, like screaming into the air. Do you remember? She is a piece of work. I don't quite understand how she can be on the extreme far right now, having been married to this Democratic governor previously. It doesn't make any sense to me, but, people's allegiances often shift where the money is, Just follow the money. Anyway, that video that I posted, it was just like, it's not new. Obviously, people have seen this video, but it just really gives a little bit of a snapshot into Mark Meadows' behavior and the kind of mood that he was in on that day. And it was very celebratory. They knew that they had a plan. They knew that they had a coup ready to go. They knew what was about to play out. And Trump did nothing for 3 hours. I mean, the reason that Trump's going to get away with it is because he's a rich white man. Or rich orange man. And tragically, that's how it is, It just is. But I'm really hoping. I mean, the problem is, by installing conservatives on the Supreme Court, this case will end up going all the way to the Supreme Court. So let's say if Trump will appeal everything. And so it'll fundamentally end up in the Supreme Court. And of course, then he'll get off because his mates are in there, because he put them in. 3 of them. It's a very heavily packed and stacked Supreme Court. Carl, good morning. In California. Paras, good morning. Kenneth, Anthony, Stacy. Thank you for spending your morning with Backchannel. 9:42 here on the West Coast right now. Okay, let's move on to the next newspaper. It is the Tampa Bay Times from Florida. Capitol rioter reconsiders is the headline. A Largo man who faces sentencing on Friday says he was manipulated and is seeking mercy. Wow. There's a photograph of him wearing a Stars and Stripes hoodie. A Largo man who admitted he threw a wood plank and sprayed and hurled a fire extinguisher at police officers during the January 6 riot at the U.S. Capitol now realizes the wrongfulness of his actions, according to a letter he wrote to a federal judge. Yes, I read the letter yesterday, actually. His handwriting was a peach. It was on yellow paper, and his handwriting was a peach. Yeah, a legal pad, I guess. But, to me, the yellow paper just kind of made it even more peachy. Robert Scott Palmer, who faces sentencing on Friday, asked for mercy from U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan, apologizing in a lengthy handwritten note for his role in the attack that sought to subvert the results of the 2020 election. The note, which accompanied a sentencing memo filed by Palmer's defense lawyer, states that he now understands that he and others were lied to and manipulated by those in power. They kept spitting out the false narrative about a stolen election and how it was our duty to stand up to tyranny. He says, little did I realize that they were the tyrannical ones, desperate to hold on to power at any cost, even by creating the chaos they knew would happen with such rhetoric. Federal prosecutors have asked a judge to sentence Palmer to a little more than 5 years in prison. It's the longest penalty sought so far to those who have pleaded guilty to crimes related to the insurrection. I mean, look, the cynic in me is like, his lawyer said, write the letter, it's going to mean you'll get a softer sentence. That's the cynic in me, right? Because this is what his lawyer is paid to do, is paid to give him advice. And I just don't see how it's forgivable, because, overturning any election is is criminal. There's a system in place, and seeking to overturn it should have been the clue. These tunes are so good this morning. I really feel like I'm in a jazz club now, and they're just going off on one. It's almost like it's that experimental section of the night around midnight where they just, a few drinks have kicked in and they're just going for it. Photograph of Father Christmas, Santa Claus, on the front of the Tampa Bay Times as well. It says, Santa is back. Last year was mostly lost to the pandemic Grinch, but now little ones can meet the jolly elf in person. It's almost normal, whatever that is. And a photograph of a 10-month-year-old posing with a picture with Santa at the International Plaza on the front. Okay, next up. Let's move on. Oh, let me just tell you before we do move on that Volley, the creators of Backchannel, have a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs and their one-star cinema review, or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. Or what about the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, whose program Your Pal Hal directly follows this show at 11 a.m. I'm a little horse, like a small horse, like a pony. I'm a little pony. Okay, off to Oklahoma now. Oklahoma! We're going to the Tulsa world. 1 year out, boosters expected to be routine. Well, I said this, didn't I? I said let's not call it a booster. Let's call it the third shot. Because you're going to need a fourth shot and a fifth shot, and you're just going to need to keep getting hit every 6 months. It says many Oklahomans have received 3 doses of COVID-19 vaccine in the past year, and the Tulsa Health Department Director Bruce Dart says the practice of getting repeated shots should be warmly embraced because he expects boosters to become a routine part of life. Wednesday marks the 1-year anniversary of the first person in Tulsa County to receive the COVID vaccine, a day after the first dose was given in Oklahoma. Since then, more than 5 million COVID-19 shots have been administered in the state, with in excess of 2 million Oklahomans completing their initial vaccine series. Well, that's good to know. I'm very pleased about this because I actually feel like, we it's just increasingly difficult, isn't it, to kind of work out who is and who isn't going to kind of get vaccinated, because these days people are very stealthy. Some people are very, just regular people who you might think are not extreme in their views, and yet they might be anti-vaccine. And that happens. They might just not like any vaccine, not specific to COVID. They might not be into the measles, mumps, rubella, polio, tetanus. They might just be one of those people who is just anti-vaccine generally. And some people are, these people have been around for a long time. But I'm pleased in Oklahoma, where I would have expected there to be more hesitancy, that it seems that, most people, well, say that, it's actually a little bit under. The national average is 63.9%, and in Oklahoma it's 55.7%. A new study connects obesity to COVID. It says, new research may explain why physicians have observed COVID-19 brings a greater risk of serious complications for patients who are obese, according to the leader of Well OK. Dr. Stan Schwartz of the Northeastern Oklahoma Business Coalition on Health says the study with an as yet unvalidated data shows a correlation between COVID-19 case severity and the amount of fatty tissue in the patient. Yeah, this is partly why I went vegan, and stopped eating meat and dairy, because my dad, when he died 2 years ago, was too fat. And I said, is there anything you can do, or we could have done? And they said, well, if he was less fat, that might have helped. And, that really chimed with me. And so that day was the last time I ate meat and dairy. Because the problem with meat and dairy is they tend to kind of be associated with fatty things. The meat itself is not necessarily fat, but it's like what the kind of stuff you eat. Whereas now, do you know what my favorite recipe is? My favorite vegan recipe? Vegetables. I get like sweet potato, Brussels sprouts, a red pepper, garlic, a red onion, and maybe some carrots. And I just put them on a tray. I cut them up, put them on a tray, drizzle with oil, salt and pepper, in the oven for about 45 minutes to an hour. And then I just put a dollop of mustard on top and mix it all up. And it is the most delicious meal. Calorie-free, completely healthy, fills you up. And if you're desperate for some carbs, you could do some potato, or you could do just a little bit of couscous or something like that. Quinoa. But people forget that you can just roast vegetables, don't they? They kind of feel like that should just go on the side. And I used to think that until I started eating them as a main course. And I was like, oh, actually, this is plenty. I'm still fat, though. Okay, let's move on. What do we have now? We're gonna talk about Mark Meadows because let's be clear, this guy is really the star of the moment, isn't he? For all of the wrong reasons. It's the first time the House has voted to hold an ex-member of Congress in contempt since the 1830s, and I don't even care that he's an ex-member of Congress. It's irrelevant to me because congressmen and women have not shown themselves to be particularly respectable recently. Just look at Lauren Boebert, for example. These people they don't hold themselves in high regard or high esteem. Anyway. It says the U.S. House of Representatives has voted to hold ex-Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress, paving the way for prosecution. Last week, Mr. Meadows said he would stop cooperating with a congressional panel investigating the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. Now, let's just go back and look at that for a second, because let's just think about the mindset here. We mentioned this yesterday, but I'm just going to do it again, just to set this up. Initially, he said he wouldn't cooperate. They subpoena him. He's like, I'm not going to cooperate. They subpoena Bannon. Bannon's like, I'm not going to cooperate. They then refer Bannon for prosecution. Meadows is like, okay, I'm going to cooperate. Shows up, gives them 6,000 emails and text messages. Right? So weird. Gives them all of this data. And then when they find something that's like a little bit concerning, I think it was the PowerPoint presentation that displayed the coup, the guy's like, change my mind. I don't want to cooperate. But he's already given all the data from that point onwards. And now, of course, they really want to talk to him. I mean, the guy's an idiot. And so they've got all of this. Yeah, maybe he thought they'd leave him alone if he handed over all this stuff. And they're like, actually, just looking at this stuff, you need to come in for a chat, mate. Ken, thanks for joining us. Stephen as well. Carl, Paras, Kenneth. Lovely crowd of backchannelers this morning. Last week, Mr. Meadows said he would stop cooperating. The vote largely fell along party lines, with the Democrat-run chamber voting 222 in favor and 208 against. He could face up to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine. Isn't that interesting? You can overthrow an election, plot against the United States, and only get a year in prison. That's all you get, a year in prison. I just don't. Is it because there's no precedent on the statute book or in case law where you can basically go, oh yeah, insurrection, plotting insurrection, stopping the U.S. president from calling in the National Guard, who are told that they can only do traffic duty that day. Yeah, that's just a year in prison. I mean, surely it's a life sentence. You plot against your own country. Surely that's a life sentence. Apparently not. Not if you're a rich white person with a book to sell. Yeah, in England they would have. I mean, in the old days of England, not now, but that's treason, isn't it? And treason, the punishment for treason was a beheading. I mean, they used to behead members of the royal family. Anne Boleyn, who was married to Henry VIII, she got her head chopped off. No, they're not using treason, but they need to start using treason. But they weren't using coup until about 2 weeks ago. So hopefully, these things will... I just think that Americans have to come to terms with the fact that these things are as serious as they are, because otherwise everything's just a bit of a joke. Mr. Meadows will now be referred to the Justice Department, which will ultimately decide whether to formally charge him. Before last week, he'd provided the committee about 9,000 pages of records regarding the events before reversing course and claiming that his communications are protected by executive privilege. Harper, good morning. Do you know what I think it is? This is what I think it is. Just this toing and froing. Do you know what I think it is? Trump. That's what it is. It's Trump. It's Meadows talking with Trump and Trump going, no. Just stop dealing with them. Because who else is going to give advice that he's going to listen to that is like higher up the tree? Trump's at the top of the tree. After Mr. Meadows twice refused to appear at scheduled depositions, on Monday the congressional panel voted unanimously to recommend that the House hold him in contempt. The text messages are insane. I mean, the text messages that were sent back and forth, I mean, it's just insane. All the different people that were involved in, sending texts and like the fact that no one could get hold of the president, and even Mark Meadows, it seemed, didn't have much sway. I mean, that's the thing about Trump. He's not collaborative. He doesn't work collaboratively. He is basically the king. The world king in his mind. And so he doesn't take advice from anybody. He spent his whole life suing people just to get them off his back. He's rarely had to go to court. I mean, you can watch some of the videos of him like giving evidence and being on the stand in court, and it's hilarious. The guy is like, he's so angry. He really actually reminds me of my dad. Isn't that a tragedy? Like, there's just the way that he is. It just really reminds me of my dad. Just like po-faced and I don't know, it's just so depressing. The problem with The Independent, Carla, is that it is riddled with advertising and overlays, and it's very difficult. Anyway, I've managed to get the reader to work. So it says Liz Cheney opens the door for criminal referral against Trump. I mean, Liz Cheney's kind of been amazing. She's a Republican. She's Dick Cheney's daughter. And she really is the one that has led the charge on this because she cares passionately about democracy. Turns out that 208 Republicans don't. That's my concern. It says the House of Representatives on Tuesday voted to hold ex-President Donald Trump's former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, in contempt of Congress and refer him to the U.S. Department of Justice for prosecution after his refusal to testify to the Select Committee investigating the Capitol riot. On Monday, members of the committee revealed texts between Mr. Meadows and Donald Trump Jr. and Fox News personalities, among others, revealing that they urged him to get Mr. Trump to stop the riots in real time. Representative Liz Cheney revealed new texts on Tuesday, and U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham said that he spoke with Ivanka Trump to deliver a message to her father, urging him to tell his people to leave. Mr. Meadows has accused congressional Democrats of trying to weaponize the information he previously provided the committee as he faces explosive accusations of treasonous behavior. I mean, did he think that the stuff was legitimate? I mean, is he so indoctrinated into this world of this garbage that he actually thought handing over this stuff was just going to prove that he was right and they were wrong? Is that the issue, that they genuinely believe that they are, that there was election fraud? I mean, the Associated Press yesterday did their own study on election fraud during the 2020 election. Do you know how many cases of fraud they found across the entire country? They've literally spent the whole time researching it. 460 cases of fraud. 460. Which suggests to me, and this kind of fraud is like people trying to vote twice, or, just like little things. Nothing like major, not like foreign interference, just individuals who are just like don't know how to vote, or who are doing it on purpose because they want Trump to win or something. Do you know how many? Do you know that 460 cases of fraudulent votes is not enough to swing the election? Right? Biden won by a clear. He got what? Was it 7 million votes more? It was a clear win. So this is my point. It's like, even if all of this fraud was taken seriously, it was less than 500 ballots. Less than 500 ballots across the entire country. 150 million people voted. And yet there was less than 500 of these cases. There was, which by all accounts is not fraud. There was no fraud. It was just, it's not enough to swing the election, Mr. Trump. You lost. White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre reiterated to journalists that President Joe Biden had full confidence in Democratic leadership in the House, as well as the Select Committee investigating the January 6 following the Meadows contempt vote. Ms. Jean-Pierre said on Wednesday aboard Air Force One that Mr. Biden has full confidence of the Select Committee and the Speaker of the House to manage the investigation into the attack, and will let that process run its course. Biden commented on the House's vote to hold Mark Meadows in contempt on Wednesday as he departed the White House to tour storm damage in Kentucky. Speaking with pooled journalists, he indicated support for the Democratic-led contempt resolution, which passed in a near party-line vote late on Tuesday. The two Republicans serving on the 6th of January committee were the only members of their party to defect. So effectively, even after all of this evidence continues to come out, all of these Republican congressmen and senators, they still are sticking to their guns and claiming that none of this was a problem, that there was no insurrection. That's what Laura Ingraham said on Fox News. There was no insurrection. Those were her words. There was no insurrection. Sean Hannity, who also texted Mark Meadows and said, get him to call it off, said on the day that he said, I don't know who these people are. I mean, bear in mind, there are all these people wearing Trump hats and carrying Trump flags, right? And shouting Trump, Trump, Trump. And we're just at the Trump rally. He's like, I don't even know who these people are. They're probably Antifa. They all knew. They were all in on it. Steve Bannon, 2 days before on his podcast, said, you wait till January 5th. Something's going to kick off. They all knew this whole thing was planned. I actually think it was probably planned years earlier. Do you remember when Bannon actually worked in the White House in the first few months, and he said that his desire was to create so much chaos that it brought the government down? He wanted to basically do away with the federal government. These people are, he's a constitutional arsonist. I don't like that phrase, the big lie, that the media has coined, the big lie, because the problem is that both sides are using it. The left uses it to claim that, Trump lied about, the election fraud, and the right use it to describe the left using it to describe election fraud. They're saying it's their lie, and they're like, no, it's their lie. It's insane. Should we do the US news update, Carla? Because this is an opportunity. Oh, you don't have it? Did I not send it to you? I didn't send it. Now that's not like me. That is not like me. I have a lovely little routine. That's so crazy. I could do it live. That's annoying that I didn't send it. I wonder if I've actually got it in. I wonder if I could send it to you now. Let's have a look. I'm trying to find the US News Update, which is it's the podcast that we do, you know. Can you play just the audio? Does that work? Maybe. All right, I'll send you just the audio because it turns out I never made a video. I never made it. But I'll send it to you, and then maybe you can, you know. It's the podcast that I do every single day, called US News Update for the Volley Network, which it enables you to hear the entire American news in 2 minutes. It's a very good podcast. I highly recommend it. Very good. You can download it from wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, well, let's see if Carla can, because you can't even show the video anyway, so I might as well just be sending you the audio. Anyway, I've sent it to you. Hopefully it's of use. Let's take a little look at what we've been referring to. We've been looking at Mark Meadows, the latest on him, and working out why it is that somebody with such a small brain can be given such an important job to do. He was, of course, the former White House Chief of Staff. And then I think we're going to be looking at the Governor Cuomo story shortly, aren't we? Him being forced to give up the $5.1 million in pandemic book earnings as it's discovered he used state resources to write his book. We'll take a look at that story in a little more detail. And also we're going to look at the Islamophobia story, which is coming out of Congress. Again, you know, this is Ilhan Omar facing her own colleagues. One of them who only yesterday referred to her as being part of a terrorist organization, which is, of course, not true. It's 7 minutes after 10 here on Backchannel and everywhere, in fact, on the West Coast. I'm in California. It's 7 minutes after 1 Eastern. It says, do you think returning... it needs to be an MP4. I'm sorry. So we're going to look at the Andrew Cuomo story, because this is, of course, something that is very... You know, it's a very big story. It's actually one of these stories where you're just like, why? Why would you do all of these things? I do get the feeling that, you know, he's another one of these people where it's like, money is so corrupting, isn't it? It's just so corrupting. Ex-governor expected to fight the ethics committee ruling over American leadership, which he reportedly made staffers work on. It says former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been ordered to hand over about $5.1 million he made from a book he wrote, i.e. a book he reportedly made his staffers write, about his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, do you remember when Cuomo was doing these daily video briefings? And this is what turned him into a bit of a megastar. You know, he actually was very open and honest about the situation. He really, because New York, of course, faced the worst of the pandemic, just the worst of the pandemic, because of the number of people there that are packed into such a small city. You know, that's the problem with the city, isn't it? It's just so crammed, a little bit like London and, you know, any of these inner cities, these metropolis where people live on top of each other, literally. Ash, hello, thank you for joining us. Rachel, hello. Harper. Stacey, goodbye. Sorry that you had to leave. The decision handed down yesterday by the Joint Commission on Public Ethics ordered Cuomo to give the proceeds to the State Attorney General's office. The AG's office had also been given the authority to enforce the ruling. But getting the full sum may be difficult, as Cuomo donated $500,000 to charity and dropped another $1 million in a trust for his daughters. Plus, the disgraced former governor, who resigned in the midst of a slew of scandals, including a bombshell report on his alleged sexual misconduct, appears ready to fight the ruling in court. I mean, he's one of these kind of old school people that thinks that there's a difference between being overtly touchy-feely, huggy-kissy, and being a sexual predator. Like, he thinks that the two are completely separate because he's of that generation. And I just think what he needs to realize is that the world's changed. There's no kissy, huggy, squeezy anymore. It's done. We don't do that anymore. We respect people's personal space. If somebody wants to huggy, kissy, squeezy us, then they maybe will ask. I just feel like it's all a little bit 1979. You know? It's all a bit 1979. You know, often people tend to continue to exist in the decade that they were most successful. Do you know about this? Trump's an example of this. You know, the 80s, he was on fire. He wasn't as fat, so he kind of probably in his mind thinks that that's who he still is. And, you know, there are people, you can give multiple examples of this. You know, when somebody was at their most successful, most powerful, or most happy even, they tend to want to remain in that decade. It's a little bit like Alicia Silverstone posting these pictures of her in Batman. Seriously. It was 25 years ago. Give it up. But we become obsessed with our moment of glory. And so I actually think Andrew Cuomo probably remembers himself as a younger, fitter, more attractive person. And he thinks he's still that guy. In the same way that Trump thinks he's still that kind of 80s. Do you remember Trump doing that dance with Jeffrey Epstein? Looking at those women. That's for me, one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen was that horrific, predator sex dance that he did. Pointing at the girls, almost like picking out his favorite. And Melania's standing right there and she didn't seem to care. Ghislaine Maxwell, you know. I wonder if Cuomo was at that party as well. It's just terrible. It's just just makes me very uncomfortable. Anyway, the decision handed down on Tuesday by the Joint Commission on Public Ethics ordered Cuomo to give the proceeds to the State Attorney General's office. Jim McGuire, a lawyer for Cuomo, said the actions today are unconstitutional. They exceed its own authority and appear to be driven by political interests rather than the facts and the law. Should they seek to enforce this action, we'll see them in court. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? That America is just like lawyers suing people. People just get sued all the time here. That's all America is. It's just a series of lawsuits. The lawsuits make the law, don't they? Cuomo was contracted to write American crisis leadership lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic last summer, when he was still seen by many as an emblem of calm, rational leadership for the way he guided New York through the COVID crisis. The book was a bestseller when published in October 2020. A year later, he was not only facing the multiple sexual misconduct allegations, but an investigation also found numerous shortcomings in the administration's handling of the COVID crisis, including reports that his office fudged the numbers about the number of COVID-19 related nursing home deaths. It's kind of sad, isn't it? You know? The greatest irony about the book, they say, is the revelation that an Assembly Judiciary Committee report, or in an Assembly Judiciary Committee report, that it says while Cuomo's administration was botching part of its pandemic response, the governor made his staff work on an American crisis. He actually made them work on the book whilst this was happening. Senior state officials took meetings with publishers and agents, transcribed and drafted portions of the book, and coordinated promotion, and all during normal work hours as part of the regular course of work in the executive chamber, in the executive mansion. One portion of the report even read, a senior state official complained in a text message to a colleague that work on the book was compromising the official's ability to work on the COVID-related matters. What a mess. What a gigantic mess. Anyway, he's been ordered to give up the $5 million in pandemic book earnings. And his brother, I mean, this is the thing, you know, I really liked Chris Cuomo as a newscaster. I thought he was very good, but you just can't compromise your position like that. You know, he advised his brother on multiple occasions. of how to circumnavigate the public image associated with being caught and outed. It's all about the tunes today, I'm telling you. It's all about the tunes. So what do you think? I mean, do you feel that someone like Andrew Cuomo should know better? I mean, is this now the way it has to be? Just like it has to be black and white. There can be no gray areas. If you are the boss of an organization, you cannot interfere with anybody. I mean, this is the great thing about remote working now, isn't it? That we're less likely to have office romances. We're less likely to kind of get caught up in a situation that was misconstrued or misunderstood, because we're all operating remotely, and it's great. I really like it. I'm very, very happy to be working remotely, especially when the technology works. When the technology is as good as it is today, I'm very happy. Technology is on fire today, like not a single problem, not a moment. Am I tempting fate? Wow. That's exciting, Carla. She's worked out how to get the US News Update working. Wonderful. We're very much a work in progress, aren't we? We're just a work in progress. Physically, emotionally, socially. We're just a work in progress. Learning all the time. Well, let me know when it's ready, and then I can go to the bathroom. I also want to talk about Ilhan Omar. This is after the Representative Scott Perry accuses Ilhan Omar of being in a terrorist organization. I wonder what it was that made him think that. Maybe it was the fact that she's Muslim. Maybe that's all it took. Incredible, isn't it? I mean, but isn't it crazy that, you can't lose your job in Congress? I mean, this is the thing. They just don't fire people. They just don't. And they don't discipline people. All they do is take away their committee responsibilities, like they did with Marjorie Taylor Greene. As House lawmakers debated legislation to monitor and combat Islamophobia, Republican U.S. Representative Scott Perry baselessly accused Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar, one of two Muslim women in Congress, of being affiliated with terrorist organizations. His remarks follow comments from far-right U.S. Representative Lauren Boebert, who suggested in speeches to her constituents that she was mistaken for a terrorist at the U.S. Capitol. It's incredible. Okay, we'll talk more about this in just a second. It's 18 after 10 on the West Coast here. Let's hear the latest news from the US News Update. Here it is. It's Wednesday, December 15. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. An Associated Press review of every potential case of voter fraud in the 6 battleground states disputed by former President Donald Trump has found fewer than 475, a number that would have made no difference in the 2020 presidential election. Democrat Joe Biden won Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and their 79 electoral college votes by a combined 311,257 votes out of 25.5 million ballots cast for president. The disputed ballots represent just 0.15% of his victory margin in those states. The cases could not throw the outcome into question, even if all the potentially fraudulent votes were for Biden, which they were not, and even if those ballots were actually counted, which in most cases they were not. The review also showed no collusion intended to rig the voting. Virtually every case was based on an individual acting alone to cast additional ballots. The findings build on a mountain of other evidence that the election wasn't rigged, including verification of the results by Republican governors. The AP review, a process that took months and encompassed more than 300 local election offices, is one of the most comprehensive examinations of suspected voter fraud in last year's presidential election. It relies on information collected at the local level, where officials must reconcile their ballots and account for discrepancies, and includes a handful of separate cases cited by secretaries of state and state attorneys general. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. Welcome back. We're back. That was it. That was great. I mean, I don't know how you did that, Carla, but you made magic happen. So the US News Update is a daily podcast that I do for the Volley Network. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, let's just jump straight into this story about Scott Perry, the US representative that has accused Ilhan Omar of being a terrorist, based on nothing, it seems. And so, I mean, this is certainly something that we need to take very seriously, because if you think about it, it's just pure racism, and it's happening on the floor of the US Congress, and yet, no one seems to really be bothered. But what worries me is it's like part of the reason why no one seems to be bothered, like, Kevin McCarthy is not saying anything about it, is because these are the views that are held by all of these people. He's the only one who spoke up, but this is their view. During a debate on a bill to internationally combat Islamophobia, the House parliamentarian found that Representative Scott Perry made inappropriate remarks that were not in order with the House rules and manual when he alleged that Representative Ilhan Omar, a Minnesota Democrat and the bill's author, is anti-Semitic and affiliated with a terrorist organization. He said, "We all agree that nobody should be persecuted based on their faith. We all agree on that. But American taxpayers shouldn't be forced to pay terrorist organizations that the maker of this bill is affiliated with, like the one that's an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terror finance case in the United States of America's history," he said. Perry and several others who spoke in opposition to the bill, which seeks to establish an office to monitor and combat Islamophobia within the State Department, cited a lack of definition for Islamophobia in the bill, which he argued would be made up based on individuals' political proclivities. By intentionally leaving the definition of Islamophobia blank in this bill, the gentle lady and my friends on the other side of the aisle are creating an office in our State Department that will likely spew anti-Semitic hatred and attack Western ideas throughout the world under the farce of protecting Islam, Perry said. And as you can see by this debate, the goal is to silence dissent and critiques of terrorism. Last week, Perry said that he was assailed by Democrats during the bill's markup in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who called him Islamophobic, nasty, mean, and rude. He claimed they criticized him for offering amendments that would prevent American tax dollars from going to organizations with ties to terrorism. I mean, he's from Pennsylvania. He's Pennsylvania's 10th U.S. congressional district. I just want to know, what is the terrorist organization that he claims that she is a member of? Where's his evidence? What is he even suggesting? Where are the facts here? Or is this just his opinion? Because he's a racist. I mean, where is? I mean, present the evidence. It just makes no sense to me that this guy is even allowed to stand up in Congress and kind of say anything if his views are so extreme, and yet completely without basis. One of the bill's co-sponsors, Representative Janice Schakowsky of Illinois, who is Jewish, said Omar had been the subject of relentless attacks and horrifying threats, not just from her fellow Americans, but even within the halls of Congress. She says, "As a Jew myself, I see the parallel quite directly between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and we need to be combating both," she said. Comes just a few weeks after the video emerged showing the first-term lawmaker Boebert calling Omar, a Muslim who was born in Somalia, a member of a jihad squad. That comment led to calls by Democrats for a vote to strip Boebert of her committee assignments. I mean, that's it. That's it. Just strip her of her committee assignments. Let's take a little look at some more info on this. This is very, very interesting. And this has been something that has been brewing. I mean, look, you only have to look at the kind of lynchings that were, that caused the civil rights movement. The hatred, the division between black and white. Well, the hatred of blacks from whites, and the blacks didn't hate the whites, but they certainly had good reason to. In one recent incident of Islamophobia, an anonymous group in the UK declared on the 13th of April they declared that, Tuesday, April the 3rd should be Punish a Muslim Day. They circulated leaflets in several cities in the UK calling for people to attack Muslims in various ways by using gun, knife, vehicle or otherwise, and advocating for burning and bombing mosques. And in the US, studies show that in 2015 and 2016, hate crimes and attacks against Muslims skyrocketed, according to a 2017 Pew Research Center analysis, which relied on FBI statistics. Assaults on Muslims have easily surpassed post-9/11 levels. And then another factor that experts often point to is the rise of Donald Trump, who referred to any kind of minority brown-skinned country as a shithole country. You remember? He actually did it when he was sitting at a cabinet meeting. He didn't even just say it secretly. His racism and his xenophobia is so obvious, and he doesn't even realize he's doing it. As a presidential candidate, Trump made frequent use of anti-Muslim rhetoric, saying things like, "I think Islam hates us," and suggesting he was not opposed to the idea of a Muslim database. After taking office, he signed an executive order barring people from several Muslim-majority countries from entering the US. And my friend in London, Hannah, who is Muslim but born in England, she's of Eritrean descent, tried to come to America for vacation. They wouldn't allow her in. They wouldn't even let her board the plane at Heathrow Airport. She'd been blocked, barred, for no reason other than Trump's executive order banning all Muslims from entering the US until, and I quote, "until we can work out what the hell is going on." That's what he said. That was his justification. He didn't know what the hell was going on. He appointed people who have espoused anti-Muslim views to key cabinet positions. He's even circulated anti-Muslim videos to his tens of millions of Twitter followers. Khaled Bidoun, a law professor and the author of a new book called American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear, argues there's something much more complex going on. According to him, fear and hatred of Muslims and the religion of Islam has deep roots in American history. He explains that this type of radicalized hatred is not limited to Muslims. It also impacts non-Muslim Arab Americans and South Asian Americans, among others. And anti-Muslim sentiment isn't solely a problem on the right in America. The left also has a problem with Islamophobia. He says essentially, the book describes that even though Islamophobia animates a modern form of bigotry, the essence of the hate is not new. He says it's deeply rooted in American political discourse. It's deeply rooted in American law. It's deeply rooted in American framings of who was a citizen and who was not a citizen. And it's been given a new face, a new caricature, if you will, as a consequence of the war on terror, and then intensified by the rhetoric of Donald Trump. Trump adopted this strategy of full-fledged, explicit and kind of angry rhetoric against not only Muslims, but a whole range of people. And you remember pundits and analysts on television, even scholars, saying that Trump is only doing this to win the race and that once he was actually in office, he would do away with this intense rhetoric. Well, that obviously didn't happen. A week into his administration, he signed the executive order, now known as the first rendition of the Muslim ban or the travel ban. What many thought was mere rhetoric to mobilize voters quickly evolved or devolved into Islamophobic policy during the early stages of his presidency. He weaponized that rhetoric into real policy impacting Muslim communities. And I've often said that for me, that was the day in which Trump should have been impeached. Not waiting 3 years to impeach the guy. You impeach him for imposing a Muslim ban on day 4 of his presidency. That's when you impeach him. Because there was nothing to the Muslim ban. Was there? There was nothing to it. It was literally pure racism. I mean, the guy's doing an arms deal worth $600 million with Saudi Arabia. Incidentally, Saudi Arabia was not one of the countries banned from entering the US, nor was the United Arab Emirates, nor was Dubai. I mean, the people where the wealthy were, they weren't banned from coming in. It was just these countries that he deemed unsavory. It's just Islamophobia, largely on account of it being so closely tied and tethered to Trump. That's fundamentally what there is now in America. You know, a form of hate that comes from people on the right. Obama established this state-sponsored program called Countering Violent Extremism. And as a consequence of the program, his surveillance of Muslim communities actually was broader and more intense than the Bush administration. And Obama was lauded as one of the most, if not the most, progressive presidents in America's history. Another example are popular media personalities like pundits like Bill Maher. Now, I've never liked Bill Maher and Bill Maher's show. I just don't see it as being helpful in terms of improving community relations. But, it's a space for really vibrant and important discussion on a range of issues. And Bill Maher is somebody who's very left-wing on a range of issues like LGBTQ community and the environment, but he veers entirely away from it when it comes to Muslims and Islamophobia and espouses this clash of civilizations, this narrow view of Islam as being a faith that is entirely antithetical to the West, that Muslims are a pariah that need to be policed and dealt with by the state. I just don't understand how you can be so blind to the reality. I mean, Islam as a word means peace. And yet, because of a handful of extremist terrorists, whether it be on 9/11 or committing crimes in Afghanistan, people who are suicide bombers or elsewhere around the world, you can't take that concept, that constant of them all being Muslim and saying, well, that's a Muslim thing. It's not a Muslim thing. There's 1.4 billion Muslims in the world? When we think of Islamophobia and who it victimizes, it's important to be nuanced. So your average Joe and Jane living down the street who might be ignorant or misinformed about Islam, who adopt a radicalized view of who Muslims are, these are private Islamophobes, and private Islamophobes can victimize and target non-Muslims. A quintessential example is Balbir Singh, a man who was killed in Arizona in September 2001. He was a gas station owner, a Sikh man who had a turban and a beard, and he was the first post-9/11 hate crime or hate murder. He wasn't a Muslim because Sikh men, fit within this radicalized caricature some people have of Muslims, they can be victims of private Islamophobia. And obviously there are South Asian men who are Hindu or Christian or atheist or agnostic. And on the West Coast, a lot of Latino men are kind of fit within the physical caricature of how people perceive Muslim men. And the state, whether it be the federal government or even local government, is different. They have a more nuanced and developed understanding of Islam as a consequence of 9/11. They know at this juncture, based on the war on terror mandate, that Muslims are racially diverse and ethnically diverse in regard to ideology, as well as their physical attributes. And Islamophobia intersects with Black Lives Matter in distinct and dynamic ways. A large number of African Americans are Muslim, and we know that anywhere between 25 and 33% of the entire Muslim population here in the United States is black. So when we think about violent policing, we think about these issues that the Black Lives Matter movement has committed to addressing and dismantling. And it's also important to frame Islamophobia as another aspect of white supremacy, specifically war on terror programming, when we think about the state-sponsored Islamophobic programs, whether it be counter-radicalization in the Patriot Act or the Muslim ban and so on. So these are the thoughts of Khalid Beydoun. He talks about the tools that are tied to white supremacy. The ultimate primary objective of Black Lives Matter is to dismantle and do away with white supremacist structures and policies from the state. And that is also the objective of a movement that's looking to do away with structural Islamophobia. The victims of Islamophobia, racist policing, the school-to-prison pipeline, can be black Muslims, they can be Latino Muslims, they can be indignant and working-class Muslims. It's important to frame that these movements intersect and they converge in really dynamic ways. And I often say this about nuance. Nuance has to be applied to everything. You can't... it's ironic to say that life is not black and white when we're talking about a kind of racially divisive conversation. But, it literally isn't. It is in terms of this conversation, and it isn't in terms of nuance. I think the reason, and I'm going to say hi to Beverly, who's joined us from Washington. Hi, Beverly. It's 10:37, by the way, here on the West Coast. It's government policy that has really spearheaded much of this, because government policy invariably is written by old white men. And old white men still don't understand the nuance of Islamophobia or the nuance of systemic racism. And I reckon that half the people, and I include people like Sean Hannity, who's a kind of a mouthpiece for the far right, they don't know what systemic racism is. They have no empathy for it. They have no concept of how it affects people of color on a daily basis. They just can't get their heads around it. One of the positive developments in the context of this current intense moment is that Islamophobia has become a mainstream social justice issue. It's something that Muslims, but also non-Muslims, are talking about. And there might be, say, a Chinese-American undergraduate at UCLA who knows what Islamophobia is, who has a nuanced understanding that it's being extended by the state. It's been unleashed by private individuals. And that's really eye-opening. It foreshadows even greater strides being made in future. The idea that there's a whole range of new communities that are mobilized and committed to fighting Islamophobia in all its forms. Because, Islamophobia is not just the phobia of Islam. It has it's a heading for a huge movement to understand about bigotry and xenophobia, and the way that bigotry and Islamophobia is baked into public policy. And the second thing is that Muslim America right now has a sizable and growing crop of leadership that are really fluent and literate in the language of racial and social justice. And that's a credit to the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of younger generation Muslim American leaders were really politically empowered and mobilized by the BLM movement. So people need to understand that Islamophobia is comprehensive, that it's not only this form of hate and violence coming from individuals on the fringe, it's far more complex than that. And it's important to see that it's something that is spearheaded by state policy and that it's deeply entrenched, it's deeply rooted, it's not a new phenomenon. And it's a cornerstone racial justice issue that hopefully commitment to fighting Islamophobia doesn't fade away when Trump fades away, although I fear he won't be fading away anytime soon. So this is something we all need to think about, but and I always go back to this, there are an increasing number of people that don't have the capacity to think about this. They can't contemplate it, they can't intellectualize it, they can't digest it even. To them it's just it's just too much. And why should they? And it's just laziness that prevents people from taking on these subjects and really spending time with them, allowing these subjects to sit with them. Do you ever do that? Instead of, if you can't work something out, do you allow it just to sit with you? Just spend time with the subject, spend time with a thought, and see how you feel after thinking about it for an hour or two? Because that's really what we have to do, isn't it? We just have to allow ourselves to be open to the idea that things need to change. We might not know how. We might not know how we can contribute to this. We might not yet understand the impact of certain policies, but we need to allow ourselves to sit with them and to think about it over time. Not years, but, weeks, days, months, just to allow ourselves to change our minds. Because I actually believe that everybody is capable of changing their mind and being open. And once you are exposed to truth, and once you're exposed to examples, people's lives, it's much easier to kind of realize that maybe you were wrong in the past, that your thoughts and your feelings previously were wrong. Okay, let's move on with our conversation, shall we? Just a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. Don't forget, if you want to say anything, if you want to get involved, you want to lend your voice to the conversation, you just wake up your device, then you say the word "say," and then your message. And maybe... Sorry, Carla? Yeah, we're going to talk about Louisa May Alcott in just a moment. I just wanted to say that if you yourself have suffered Islamophobia, or you know somebody who has, or if it's what happened in your workplace, or, then it'd be nice to hear from you. Just to have you share. And maybe you have a reaction to the Representative Scott Perry. I think people are really worried now that once this tidal wave of Islamophobia and, general racism is now out, I do actually think it's going to cause, because this happened a lot in England, and Carla, you can tell me because you're in England, but a lot of the Poles and the people from Eastern Europe who were living and working quite happily in England, once Brexit happened, which was, very much a racist event, a lot of them actually left the UK because they didn't want to be around this kind of hatred, this sense of being unwanted as Europeans. And there was kind of an exodus of people. And And the tragedy is that, a lot of these people were doing the jobs that regular people, British-born people didn't want to do. Because if you've moved to a country that is, economically sound and has opportunities for you, and then that country votes to kind of, effectively kick you out, you're not going to stick around, are you? You're not going to feel welcome. And people choose a country to live in because they feel welcome in that country. Ilhan Omar chose to live in America because she felt welcome in that country. She was born in Somalia. She moved as an asylum seeker, I think, because of the troubles in Somalia. And yet now she is made, and she managed to work her way up to become a representative of her community, a congresswoman. And now she is made to feel unwelcome by her own colleagues. It's 14 minutes to 11 here on the West Coast. Let's take a look at Louisa May Alcott, who was born on the 29th of November 1832. Besides enchanting millions of readers with her novel Little Women, she worked as a Civil War nurse. She fought against slavery, and she registered women to vote, which in itself is worthy of celebration, Her novels remain popular today as they were when they were first published in the 19th century. Little Women came out in 1868. Sequels Little Men and Joe's Boys were semi-autobiographical based on the life of Alcott and her three sisters. She was a feminist, an abolitionist, and her views are reflected in her writings. She was also the daughter of a transcendentalist. And through her father, grew up with intellectuals such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Henry David Thoreau, who also had some influence on her work. It is rather wonderful, isn't it, to kind of grow up with great people. This is why I try to, make my children be around adults as much as kids. I really think it rubs off. She was like an educator by stealth. Yeah. And she had many famous friends. Her parents, Bronson and Abigail Alcott, raised their four daughters in a politically active household in Massachusetts. As a child, she briefly lived with her family in a failed commune. This transcendentalist commune helped her parents hide enslaved people who had escaped via the Underground Railroad. Like Harriet... what was Harriet's surname? Tubman. That's right, Harriet Tubman. She had discussions about women's rights with Margaret Fuller. Throughout her life, she socialized with her father's friends, including Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Although her family was always poor, Alcott had access to valuable learning experiences. She read books in Emerson's library and learned about botany at Walden Pond with Thoreau, later writing a poem called Thoreau's Flute for her friend. She also socialized with abolitionist Frederick Douglass and women's suffrage activist Julia Ward Howe. I mean, yeah, we did do a piece on Frederick Douglass, didn't we? Yes, that's right, the Northern Star newspaper. We mentioned that last time. We should review that on a more regular basis, shouldn't we? Louisa May Alcott's first nom de plume was Flora Fairfield. As a teenager, she worked a variety of teaching and servant jobs to earn money for her family. She first became a published writer at 19 years old when a women's magazine printed one of her poems. For reasons that are unclear, she used the pen name Flora Fairfields rather than her real name, perhaps because she felt that she was still developing as a writer. But in 1854, at the age of 22, she used her own name for the first time, publishing Flower Fables, a collection of fairy tales that she'd written 6 years earlier for Emerson's daughter, Ellen. Isn't that lovely? I just love the idea of people kind of being embarrassed about their work and writing in secret. You know, I think that's kind of a big thing, isn't it? Before writing Little Women, she wrote Gothic pulp fiction under the name Nom de Plume A.M. Bernard. She wrote stories with titles like Behind a Mask and The Abbot's Ghost to make easy money. These sensational, melodramatic works are strikingly different from more wholesome, righteous vibes she captured in Little Women, and she didn't advertise her former writing as her own after Little Women became popular. Well, that often happens, doesn't it, you know? I never talk about stuff I did in the past, which at the time I was very proud of. It's all relative, isn't it, to how you know your natural evolution. I look back on stuff now and I'm like, oh, that was agony. And at the time I thought it was rather brilliant. In 1861, at the beginning of the US Civil War, she sewed Union uniforms in Concord and the next year enlisted as an army nurse. In a Washington, D.C. hotel-turned-hospital, she comforted dying soldiers and helped doctors perform amputations. Oof. Which bit did she do, the sawing or the holding? During this time, she wrote about her experiences in her journal and in letters to her family. In 1863, she published Hospital Sketches, a fictionalized account based on her letters of her stressful yet meaningful experiences as a wartime nurse. The book became massively popular and was reprinted in 1869 with more material. She did, though, and you know, a lot of people have had this. I think it's very interesting. She actually suffered from mercury poisoning. She caught typhoid fever after a month and a half of nursing in DC, and she got pneumonia. And she received the standard treatment at the time, which was a toxic mercury compound called calomel. It was used in medicines through the 19th century. And because of this exposure to mercury, Alcott suffered from symptoms of mercury poisoning for the rest of her life. She had a weakened immune system, vertigo, had episodes of hallucinations. And to combat the pain caused by the mercury poisoning, as well as a possible autoimmune disorder, such as lupus that could have been triggered by it, she took opium. And she died of a stroke in 1888 at 55 years of age. I had a friend who got mercury poisoning, and he didn't know what it was, and he didn't know how he got it, and then he worked out what it was, and it turns out it's something that we could all get. It was the fillings in his teeth that were poisoning him. Because, of course, silver fillings were used, you know, they used mercury. Do they still use mercury to fill teeth? I really hope not. Yeah, well, dentists would say that there's not enough mercury, but the thing is, my friend had a lot of fillings. You know, he had really bad teeth, and so he had a lot of fillings, big ones. And, you know, he was ingesting mercury the whole time. Every time he ate, he was ingesting small amounts of mercury, and consequently, it was making him lethargic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm just telling you what happened with my friend. He was tested. They said they found increased mercury levels in his body, and they realized, so do you know what he did? Carla, before you tear this, he had all of his fillings replaced with white fillings. And do you know what happened? He got better. He got better. Immediately. It was immediate. He had all of those fillings replaced. Just in the final moments, I'll just tell you that Louisa May Alcott never had children. She never married. She took care of her orphaned niece. In 1879, her youngest sister... Oh, am I reading 9? I should be reading 8, sorry. She pretended... This is interesting. She pretended to be her own servant in order to trick her fans. After the success of Little Women, fans who connected with the book traveled to Concord to see where Alcott grew up. 1 month, Alcott had 100 strangers knock at the door of Orchard House, her family's home, hoping to see her. Because she didn't like the attention, she sometimes pretended to be a servant when she answered the front door, hoping to trick fans into leaving. That old trick, huh? I'm sure Bruce Wayne did that a couple of times. Listen, thanks for joining me. I've really enjoyed your company on Backchannel this morning. I'm Anthony Davis. I'll come back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we'll do it all over again. Next is your pal Hal. Have yourself a great Wednesday. Bye for now.